Welcome back to the Resilient Life Hacks podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Myers, and my guest today with me is Keith Rennison. And I'm so excited to hear his story. He is the award-winning author of the book, Tenacity. You don't have to get lost in Nepal to find yourself, but it helps. And through this story that he's going to share with us, he developed a whole new system of communication. So I'm really excited to hear your stories. Thanks, and welcome to the show, Keith.
Well, thank you for having me, Elizabeth. As we said in the pre-show here, I finally had somebody to talk to about my spirituality. This is
Yeah,
a
that's
lot of
great.
fun.
Yeah,
Most of
well,
the
I'm
time,
excited to hear.
most of the time I present to financial planners, and I was a financial planner for from 1975 to 2001. So, that's a little boring.
Yeah.
It's like watching paint dry. So I really was excited to be able to hook up with you and do this today. So.
Yeah.
So let me start with a couple of things right off the bat that fit with your strong soul, strong body kind of theme for today. God has been in my life as long as I can remember. I have had conversations with him. I loved that book, Conversations with God, when it came out. I wish I'd have got that title.
Yeah.
But I have talked to God all day long for most of my life. And to be able to share with you today how my trip system and resilience in particular fits into all of that is wonderful. This is a great opportunity, and I'm really glad we met. I think that I'll start off with a little bit of how I got to this point. My mother was a very religious woman growing up, and so I grew up in a household where we went to church every Sunday, and it was a Methodist church, and that was just what you did. And with like most kids, you absorb some of it, but not all of it. It takes a while for it to kind of sink in and bring you to a place where you really understand it. And that didn't happen for me until I went to Vietnam. And I arrived there in November of 1970. And you're thrown into a war, the chaos, the things that are taking place around you you're literally in another world. And boy, did my conversation with God, those increased on a daily basis. And I held a close relationship with him throughout all of that. They say there's no atheists in foxholes. And I think that's probably quite true. I came home knowing that I wanted to be able to explore more spirituality. I had some insight while I was in Vietnam to be able to visit some Buddhist temples and some Hindu temples. There were both that were in Vietnam. And that opened the door to me to looking at a lot of other ways to be able to observe and understand how spirituality fits into other people's lives that weren't based on Christianity. It was my first foray into that world. And I found it really hugely interesting and fascinating. So when I got a chance to go to Nepal in 1992 with a friend of mine, we were both kind of crying in our beer on New Year's Eve because she'd just broken up with her boyfriend and I'd just gotten a divorce. And we said, okay, let's go somewhere. And so we picked Nepal. And so I went in 1992, and we had a wonderful trip. It was really beautiful. And I'm going to share a few photos as we go through here of some of the places that I was at while I was in with her in Kathmandu and around there. Kathmandu is a really old city. And it has a lot of things that draw out your resilience, because when you travel to a third world country, when you see these narrow streets and you see all the banners hanging from the sides and all the goods that are for sale, and there's honking horns and motorcycles everywhere, and it's very congested and tight and small, you learn to be in that traveling mindset of how to survive in a third world country and do those kinds of things. And I got to experience some more of their culture while I was there. This is I'll move a little so you can see it. This is the Bhagmati River in a town called Pastipadanath. And the Bhagmati flows into the Ganges in India, and therefore that makes it holy water. And so a lot of people come down those steps that you can see on the side there, and they will bathe, they will pray. And this is also unbelievably where they do their funerals. And let me lean this way. You can see how they have a stretcher there with an orange cloth that has a body on it, and they dip the body into the Ganges to be able to bless it before they place it on the pedestal there to the right, and they then will cremate it. And that is part and parcel of how their culture runs. They cremate everyone. And then when they're all done and the ashes are all there, they sweep them all out into the water. And so the water's actually quite filthy, but the water then flows into the Ganges. And so they are assured that they are traveling down a holy path, which has some really beautiful thoughts to it when you think about it. When I decided that I really was hitting a midlife crisis and a mid-career crisis 3 years later, I decided I was going to go back to Nepal, and I was going to go by myself. And I thought, as I was thinking of what it was like when I was there on my first trip, I got to 19,000 feet, and some of the views were spectacular. And there were places where I really felt like I could really sink my teeth into figuring out who I was and where I was going and why. And so I traveled over back to Nepal again in the fall of 1993. And when I landed in Kathmandu, they were unloading body bags because they had had tremendous snowstorms in the mountains, and the avalanches were claiming a lot of lives. So right off the bat, I was hit with a challenge, and I had to really flex my resilience muscle to be able to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? My whole trip just suddenly became undoable. And so I met with a friend that I knew in Kathmandu from the first trip, and he helped me redesign my destination. And I decided to go to a place called Kanchenjunga. It's the third highest mountain in Nepal, and it's a spectacular mountain. And I never got to it. When you get lost in Nepal, you wander around a lot and you don't make it to your destination. But on the way, I got so many experiences. This was a bus that I rode for 3 days to get deep into the Himalayas. And as you can see, they have as many people on the top of the bus as they do inside of it. And the roads are terrible. They're bouncing all over the place with potholes. We crossed a lot of small streams and rivers in that bus. One day, it was really hot. It was the third day on the bus. My frustration level was pretty high because the bus was really full. And what these buses get used for is for transportation of goods as much as anything else. And there was a lady standing in the aisle next to my seat. She had a chicken underneath her arm, and she was standing on a bag of grain. And the man in front of her had a pig. I mean, these buses really smell bad. But every time the bus would rock back and forth, that chicken would peck at me. And I have claustrophobia. So you can see there's a ladder going up the back of the bus. There's 2 more of those on the side of the bus up near the front door and by the driver. And I climbed out the window at about 40 miles an hour, grabbed a hold of that ladder and pulled myself up onto the roof because I'd had it with that chicken.
Oh,
my resilience would only go so far.
So far, right.
There's
we just recently got our chickens for the first time. They're still young, but I was just thinking, man, it's what comes out the other end continually. I think that would make me climb the ladder.
Yeah, it's human nature is funny. We get placed in these situations and we think we have the tenacity to be able to push through and the resilience to bounce out the other side. And it was my imagination that kicked in, because that was what I wanted to be able to do, was climb out the window and get on the roof. And when I did, there was just 3 boys left up there, and they started laughing and pointing and pulled me down because I was having trouble gaining my footing. And so I got up onto the roof and rode them until the end of the day. But as you can see here, it was pretty jungly where I was at. Let me lean the other way. This path is what I was on the first day as I was starting my trek. I was about to head out. I went and put my pack on. We had arrived at the end of the road for the buses, and I had no more buses I could ride. This is where my trek actually started. It's really unique in Nepal when you think about how much wilderness they have, because the roads go so long and then they just stop and you have to hoof it from there. Mm-hmm. And as I took off that morning about 8 o'clock and had my backpack on, and I had taken my camera, I had 2 camera lenses and a whole bunch of film. And that's why you see some of these photos are in black and white, because back in those days, I really enjoyed shooting in black and white. And I took off, and within the next 3 or 4 hours, I was pretty much lost. I knew I probably couldn't even find my way back to where I'd started. You'd come to a Y in the path and you'd have to choose. Do I go right? Do I go left? Which one's going to take me to the town I'm trying to get to? A town called Toplajun. And I would run across people as I was hiking during the afternoon, but none of them spoke English. I would say Top Lejeune and kind of point, and they'd just nod. You didn't know if you were getting good directions or not. And so by the end of the day, I was pretty well lost, and I really was struggling because I had lots of blisters on my feet.
Yeah.
I had packed my boots for going to the Everest Base Camp, and they were boots that were meant for cold weather. And I was still in jungle area, and it was just terrible how many blisters I wore. They were on my toes as well. I ended up with 12 on one foot and 11 on the other. And all of that really made me dig down deep and try and pull myself back and bounce back each day, because putting my shoes on each morning really hurt. And it was one of those things where I had no choice. I had to find my way back out. And for the next 4 days, I wandered through a lot of places, through valleys that were deep with fog and clouds, and really made it treacherous in how I would try to move and get to where I'd want to go. And the paths that I followed were like this one with this fellow here. He's carrying goods that will go to people back into the wilderness. And he carries them from Cavalli, where the bus stop ended, to wherever he was going. And oftentimes it's a small store that's along the way. There were small little places that sold soup, and tea, and goodies that I could eat, but they were few and far between. And there was 2 days where I didn't run across any of those at all. And at the end of each day, I would have to find a place to sleep. And one night I stopped by, there was a husband, a wife, and a little boy by the side of the path, and they had just been finished working with their mandarin orange crop that they were growing. And the little boy spoke some English. It was really cool. And he and I actually conversed enough. I found out that he had been going to a UN-sponsored school with an American English teacher that the UN had brought over, and it was 3 valleys over, and he'd go over there 2 days a week, and they were teaching him English. And so I told him my problem, that I was lost, and I was trying to get to Top Lejeune, and could he help me? Well, he talked to his parents for a few minutes, and then he came back to me and he said, my mom and dad would be very honored if you would spend the night with us, and we would love to fix you dinner. And so they did. They took me in their hut, which was not too far away, and they fed me a dinner of what's known as dalbat, which is a lentil soup. It's pretty bland. And we sat and talked. He interpreted, and boy, was his father proud. Wow, you could just see him. Here's a 6-year-old little kid talking in 2 languages, and his dad was just beaming. It was really neat to see. But one thing that was hard was I brought Tabasco sauce, because I remember that the food was pretty bland. And when I opened it and put some in my dalbat, they could smell it instantly. Well, they almost drained one of my bottles of Tabasco sauce because they liked it so much.
Oh, wow.
Well, when it got dark, they said they'd take me where I was going to spend the night. And the little boy, I had a headlamp on because it was dark by now. And he took me around the back of the hut. And there was a lean-to that I saw when we arrived, but I didn't know what it was for. Well, as we rounded the corner, there was a great big water buffalo laying there. And he said, you can sleep next to him. He's very warm.
Nice.
And I thought, I don't want to sleep next to a bull. There's just no way. But I couldn't say no. And he had spread straw out next to the bull that I could put my sleeping bag down on. So when I laid down on it and I looked up at the night sky, it was filled with stars, and I could suddenly see there were bats way up high in the rhododendron trees. And I started feeling sorry for myself. It was like my feet hurt. I'm lost. I don't know these people. I'm sleeping next to a water buffalo. I mean, how bad can it get? Yeah. And then it kicked in that, wait a minute, you asked for this adventure. You came here to solve your problems, and you're being faced with new challenges so that you will start to experience some of these things like resilience. You've got to learn how to pick yourself up and move forward with a positive attitude. So before I went to sleep that night, I journaled a little while and I meditated a little while, and then I went to sleep. And actually, I slept great next to that water buffalo. I didn't think I was going to, but I did.
Was he as warm as they said he was going to be?
Oh, yeah. He smelled terrible, but he was warm.
Yeah. So which was worse, the bull or the chicken?
Oh, definitely the bull. The claustrophobia that I got with the chicken was, claustrophobia is a very, yeah, that's an awful affliction. Boy, when you suddenly can't get any air,
Yeah.
that can really be rough.
Hmm.
Well, the next day I happened across a little dog that I named him Buddy, and he was following me, and I could tell that he was just kind of lost and he didn't look very good. And so when I stopped to have a Cliff Bar that I got out of my pack, I threw a little to him, and pretty soon he was eating right out of my hand. And he was pretty friendly. Well, I had been trekking for 2 days by this point, trying to find this town, and I hadn't had a bath in 4. And so I came across a little stream and I followed it up off of the path. And there was actually a little pool that I could kind of sit down in. And so I took all my clothes off in the wilderness and
Hmm.
sat down in that pool with a bar of soap. And when I got all cleaned up, I trimmed my beard and tried to make myself look presentable and smell better. And I got to playing with the dog. I was throwing water at him. And so pretty soon I pulled him into the pool and I gave him a bath. I scrubbed him down with my bar of soap and I trimmed around his eyes and around his ears and his paws. And when he dried out, he looked spectacular. He was just prancing, walking down the path in front of me. He felt like he was just the king of the hill that day for sure. But at the end of each day, I learned that if I would meditate and if I would journal, that I would start to get the things out of me that where I was struggling with at home with my midlife and mid-career crisis. And those things really started to ebb a little bit. I didn't see the fear behind them before like I did. And it was then that my trip system was starting to evolve in my writing. I started seeing the 4 words: tenacity, resilience, imagination, and purpose more in what I was writing about. Because it takes all 4 of those kinds of words for us to get through life, whatever character traits you've got that you want to be able to try and live by. And they started showing up more and more. And I started to see what the desires were that I really wanted when I got home, one of which was this. I wanted to be a public speaker when I got home, and I wanted to write a book. So my journal turned into my book, and it took me almost 10 years before I started doing the public speaking. But I did find it. I worked my way towards it. And if we don't set those goals in life with resilience in times that are really bad, and we've got something to shoot for, it makes life really difficult. But if you find those levels of desire and those levels that make life and the purpose that you live by worthwhile for you, with certain boundaries that you want to live within and certain people that you want to invite in, and keep those boundaries as you live moving forward, your life will have a lot of quality to it. I found that an awful lot of what I was doing was really starting to make me feel like I was designing my purpose in life, where I was going and what I was going to do and how I was going to do them. The scenery where I was at just got more and more spectacular, even though I was lost. I took a lot of pictures. This one's just of a snow-capped peak in the background in a deep valley. Some of the deepest valleys in Nepal, in the world, are in Nepal, and they make for spectacular pictures. Yeah. And as I would walk along during the day, it would really stir my imagination about my dreams. And that's the quality we kind of lose as adults, is that childlike quality to dream. We all daydream, but do we dream about what we really want? If your meditation can turn into that, you'll start to see where you really want to go through your dreams. It's a lot like brainstorming in business. If we take the time to slow down and brainstorm with other people, you suddenly start to see how different people have different perspectives on the same problem, but you all come up with different outcomes. And what all this generates is happiness. I'm a happy guy. I love my life. I am having a ball. And I have had, and I have had through most of my life, even many of the things that were difficult. There was a time when I got home when I decided I wanted to race bicycles. I raced cars for 12 years, and that was a lot of fun, but it became expensive. And so I thought, well, I want to stay in shape. I want to have a strong body. I want to have a strong body for my soul to reside in and to enjoy. And so I took up bicycling, and then I joined a club that was a developmental club that taught us how to race. And that was in 2002. I was 54 years old. And I was terrible. Most of these guys I was riding with and racing with, they'd been racing for 20 or 30 years. They started when they were in their teens. And I was always at the back of the pack or way behind everybody. And it took me a long time to learn how to train my muscles to be able to do what they needed to do, both in endurance and in strength, to put up with the arduous nature of being a cyclist and a bike racer. So the first race that we had that year was called the Rocky Mountain Senior Games. And it was 4 races in 2 days, 2 time trials and 2 road races, 1 each in each day. And so when I started that in 2002, I wasn't finishing anywhere near with the pack on anything. And I was way down the list on the time trials. Well, over the next 14 years, I slowly worked my way up to where I was finishing 4th, 5th, or 6th in almost everything, which wasn't bad for a guy my age and learning how to race at that age. And my final race, after 14 years, I placed 3rd and made podium. It took me 14 years of continually coming back year after year after year, putting up with sort of the humiliation of, why is this guy even racing? I say, my friends and competitors would look at me like, what's he doing here? He never wins anything. But on my last race, I took 3rd place, and it was like the pinnacle. It was,
that perseverance paid off.
It did. It really did. And I went home that day, and my father was still alive at that point in time. He died 2 years ago, and at 97. So I've got a long ways to go. So that's why I stay in shape. But I called him that afternoon, and I got home, and he said, "Man, I'm really proud of you." He said, I wondered why you didn't give up years ago. He said, he said, "You've really got the patience of Job." And I said, "No, I've learned how to bounce back." Resilience has that bounce back factor.
Yep.
That when you hit bottom and you know it, you can use that energy to pull yourself back up and propel you right into a whole bunch of new ideas. If you've been brainstorming and meditating and journaling, you can propel yourself right into those new ideas with an energy that you won't find anywhere else. Resilience has that it's a fun energy. I love resilience. I don't like the fall down, but I love the bounce up.
The rebound is the nice part.
Really, it's what it boils down to. And I try to do it with gratitude. Gratitude it's talked about a lot, but it's given a lot of lip service. You gotta walk the talk if you're gonna do something like that. You've got to, if you're grateful for something, really be grateful for it. It's like today I woke up to 6 inches of snow in Denver. I'm grateful for the snow in the wintertime because I love to ski. I really enjoy going up in the mountains and skiing and enjoying myself. But now it's spring. I'm ready for my bicycle. So I wasn't really grateful for the snow this morning, but we need the moisture. But those are the kinds of things that over my lifetime, I've learned to be able to look at with my relationships with my friends, my bicycling buddies, the people that I climb mountains with. I really look back at all these things about how we need to celebrate the small successes. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't do. They always have the lofty goal and they won't be happy till they get there. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in between before you raise up to that goal, if you make it. And if you celebrate the little stuff along the way, then your resilience has power behind it and it has appreciation. And you really look forward to the next little success. I look at this success today being on this podcast with Elizabeth, because this is something I've been wanting to do. And so when I wrote her and she accepted, it was like, wow, yeah, cool. I get to be on this podcast with her and she's going to film it. I can get to put my ugly old mug on the screen and people get to look at my pictures and we're going to have some fun. So this was a success for me. You can't tell. I love to talk.
I never would have guessed that.
And so when I get this kind of an opportunity, when we're done today, Elizabeth, I will thank God for the experience to be able to be with you today.
Yeah, same here. I enjoy hearing the wisdom that you have to share with us.
It's been a lot of fun. I really have enjoyed it. Do you have time for me to go on to a couple other things?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. I mentioned to you that I had Buddy, and he had been walking along with me for, 3 days at this point. And I was sitting on one of these ridges like you see behind me. Let me switch pictures to a different one here. Some of the mountain scenery is just spectacular. This is a mountain called Machu Picchu, which means Fishtail Mountain. If you were to see the reflection of this mountain in a lake, it looks like a fishtail. And I was hiking along by myself. I had not seen anybody all day long. And I was out of food. I didn't have any food left. And I was down to a very little bit left of water. I hadn't run across any streams that day. And I sat down on a ridge top. It's like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And as I would look to the right of the ridge and then look left of the ridge, I couldn't see any smoke coming out of any hut's roof for anyone cooking. I couldn't see any paths with any hikers or trekkers or even just natives walking on them. I had hit the bottom of being lost. I just didn't see anyone. So I decided to sit down and just lean back against a tree and rest for a few minutes and figure out what I was going to do next. And as I did that, I started to actually fall asleep. I was pretty exhausted at this point. I'd been lost at that point 4 days. And I was really tired mentally, physically. I kind of just gotten to the bottom of my barrel of energy and I fell asleep sitting there. But it wasn't a deep sleep. I was just sort of dozing. And I heard footsteps suddenly coming up the path behind me. And I kind of rolled my head to the side and I opened my eye and I looked, and there was 3 of the toughest looking men coming up the path. They were in very tattered, dirty clothing. Excuse me. And they were carrying some kind of implements like shovels and stuff. And I couldn't really tell what it was. And I closed my eyes and I said, God, I wanted you to get me out of here, but I did. This doesn't look like these guys
Not
are
this way.
I suddenly felt like this was going to be maybe trouble more than it was going to be pleasant, because I had been warned when I left to do this impromptu trek, because I had no time to research it, that this area had been known to have some violence in it and that people were injured or robbed. So I was a little fearful for a few minutes. And then I heard the footsteps stop and I heard them kind of talk amongst themselves. And then one of them came forward and tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I opened my eyes and I looked up at him and I said, "You speak English," which was so nice to hear at this point.
Yeah, I bet.
And he said, "Yes." And so I explained to them my problem, that I was lost and I was trying to get to Top Lejeune, and could they be of any help to me? Well, as it turned out, in the next valley over, they were going to spend the night at one of their cousins' homes. And then they were going to Top Lejeune the next day. So I was actually going to get where I was going. So we got to their little huts where the cousins lived. And I thought we were going to spend the night at this first set of huts. And so I took my boots off and I started trimming my blisters and trying to make them feel better and put some Neosporin on them and bandage them up. And they came back after they'd been gone trying to make arrangements for us. And he said, "We're not going to stay here. We're going to go down the path about a 10-minute walk and we're going to spend the night there." And I said, "Oh, okay." Well, my backpack weighed about 60 pounds with all the stuff that I had in it. And that's part of the problem why I wore the blisters. But I didn't want to put my shoes back on because they hurt. So I dug my flip-flops out and put them on. And I put my backpack on. Well, that extra weight walking on a little half-inch of rubber flip-flop did not give you a lot of stability. And the paths were very rocky. And so it wasn't very comfortable. And it was getting dark. And I turned my flashlight on my helmet again, and the 3 guys were all walking in front of me, and I could see a light on a bench in front of a house up ahead of us. Now, everything in Nepal is done with terraces. They build out from the mountain with dirt, and then they build a wall, and then they build a house on that flat area. So it's all terraced up. All the rice paddies are in terraces filled with water and growing rice and other grain. And so we'd been passing those rice paddies, and then suddenly we came to this house, and I could see it looked like a kerosene lantern on a bench outside the front porch. Well, this wall that had been built up to put the dirt in to set the house on was about 8 feet tall, and they stuck rock out the side of the wall and made a staircase so you could just step on each step of rock sticking out and go up.
Mm-hmm.
But there was nothing on the left-hand side, obviously. There was no railing, only the wall on the right-hand side that the rocks were sticking out from. And I watched each of the three guys in front of me, boy, they just danced up those stairs easily. Just, they weren't carrying a backpack or anything. And
probably weren't wearing flip-flops either.
No. And so I really, I tried to be careful, and I kind of sped up a little bit, and I stepped up on the first rock just fine, no problem. But when I slung my left foot up to get up onto the next step, I caught the right side of my big toe on my left foot, and I took all of the hide off of it. I really scraped it deep, and it just hurt instantly. I could tell that I'd really done some major damage. And so I quickly got up the rest of the steps, and I made a beeline for that bench with that kerosene lantern on it. And I put my foot up on my knee, and I was just spurting blood. I had cut it that deep. Oh. And so I folded the skin back over the injury because it was just a flap that had been torn away, and I just folded it back on, and I gripped it really hard so that I could stop the bleeding. And instantly I got sick to my stomach and threw up. It was traumatic. I was already sick. I was already tired. I already felt bad. I hadn't had anything to eat hardly all day long except the bad water I had found. And so I threw up. And these three guys and a bunch of the farm hands that worked on the rice paddies were all kind of gathering around me. And so while I was squeezing my toe, I took open the top of my backpack where I kept my first aid kit. And I took it out, and I had some alcohol in there and some cotton swabs and a sewing kit and all kinds of stuff in there. And when I took my hand away, the bleeding had actually really slowed. How compression will hold a vein, and it'll actually start to constrict. And so the bleeding had started to stop, but my hands were all covered with blood. And so I took some alcohol and started to cut. That really stung.
Oh, yeah.
An open wound.
Yeah.
And then I had some methylate, which is even worse. But I thought I'd better try and disinfect it somehow, and methylate does that. And so I actually, when I put the methylate on, I thought I was going to pass out.
Yeah.
But I looked at the wound, and I knew that I was going to have to give myself stitches because it was horseshoe shaped, and it was connected on the flap at the bottom. And I thought, okay, well, if I could put 3 or 4 stitches around that, it could hold together. Then I could wrap it with tape and gauze, and then elevate it for a while. Maybe I'll be okay. And that's what I ended up doing. If you've never given yourself stitches, you don't want to do it.
Nope, never. I got a lot of bad blisters from running, but never that bad. I never had to sew anything back on. So.
Oh, well, I really, I had no choice because I knew that it would get infected if I didn't treat it somehow. And it held, and you can actually still see the little scar on my big toe on my left foot. You can still see where that flap of skin was put back on. So I spent the night with them, and the next morning, when I got up and got ready to leave, I could barely get my foot in my boot. It was so swollen. And I got it in, and they told me how to get onto Top Lejeune from this house. And as I started to leave, the dog Buddy didn't want to come with me. And the one little boy standing next to him said, he kind of wants to stay with me. Would you let him stay with me? And I said, of course. I mean, I was just feeding him and taking care of him. He said, but he's so soft and clean. I've never seen a dog like this. Because most of them over there are in terrible shape. But he looked wonderful. So that really kind of made for a very kind of a nice ending. Yeah. Even though I hobbled my way into Top Lejeune, I never made it to Kanchenjunga. I just couldn't walk anymore. I rested in Top Lejeune for 4 days, and then figured out a way to get back to Cavalli, and then get back to Kathmandu. But all in all, I was gone a month, and I spent almost 2 weeks in the mountains like that. And it was quite the trip. And it gave me my trip acronym, and it gave me a lot of things to talk about things like this with you, Elizabeth. So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
That's an incredible, amazing story. Could you just real quickly tell us about the trip and what those stand for again?
Of course. It's called the Trip Communication System. And it's tenacity, resilience, imagination, and purpose. And with people in business, I help them learn how to teach their clients to be tenacious, how they can do planning for their finances and things in the future, how they can be tenacious about setting things up, and learning how to be tenacious when the market drops and not to lose their tenacity and to become more panicked and in a chaos mindset, and then to learn how to bounce back after the market has dropped. Use that resilience that we talked about to bring you back to where you can actually then make some good choices on the way back up out of a problem. And imagination is all part of how you put the plan together, and this all fits with life, how you plan your life and how you do your everything that's in your life. I told you that I would also then on this last thing, Elizabeth, tell you what my life purpose was, and I'm scrolling to it here so I can read it. I can read it to you quickly. So on my last day while I was in Top Lejeune, I decided I needed to write a life philosophy because I wanted to live by something when I came home. I wanted it to be mine and how I wanted to design it. And so this is what I wrote sitting there that day. I intend to live my life with creativity, courage, and faith. I will be benevolent with others and accepting of their beliefs while seeking a life filled with happiness, laughter, moral strength, wonderful health, accumulation of wealth, and wisdom while being surrounded with love.
I like that.
It really encompassed everything that I was after.
Yeah.
And it made me really feel like I was going to be okay, when I got home, that I was going to be able to see and do all the things I wanted to do because I had a roadmap, I had a path.
Yeah. And how did you enact that or use that when you returned, when you're
I put it up
out
on
of the
wall.
wilderness?
I put it up on my wall. I see it every single day. And because live a life with creativity, courage, and faith, that sounds easy to do, but to implement that, to be creative every day and to find new things to be creative with, and to have courage to push through the hard times and to say hello to new friends and to say goodbye to friends you want to not have in your life anymore. We have all those kinds of things that happen in relationships, and to have faith that God is taking me where I need to be.
Even if you're lost.
Yeah. Well, aren't we all sort of lost? We're all trying to find our way in life all the time. And so, yeah, it definitely all of it applies. Especially filled with happiness, laughter, and moral strength. I mean, that's easy for me. I love all of those things. And being surrounded with love, I pick good people to be in my life. I choose them, and therefore I'm surrounded with happiness and love all day long. Much like you, I have a feeling you've got that. Yeah. You've got a very happy spirit.
Yeah. Well, I feel like too, the more we give kindness and love, the more that also influences the people around us.
Yeah, and charity and giving is definitely a part of my life. I've been on the boards of a number of charitable organizations over my lifetime, and I love being of service.
I sign my emails Grace Wins because I know that I'm a person who needs a lot of grace, and therefore I'm also willing to give a lot of grace because I think we all need grace, and fortunately there's an infinite supply. So
yeah, I saw that on your email. I don't know if you saw the one at the bottom of mine. It says everything you desire is just outside your comfort zone.
Yep. That is very true too. The way I word that is I say the fruit is out at the end of the limb. You stay close to the trunk. You got to get out where the limb is thinner. Definitely. So I know your vacation didn't quite go as planned. You never made it to the place you intended to go. But when all is said and done, do you think it was worth it? Are you glad you took that trip?
Yes. I mean, there hasn't been many regrets in my life. I look at it all as a learning experience, and I don't think God would have put me in front of all of those things if it wasn't meant to be something I was supposed to do. So I have a book or a cap that I wear that has resilience. I get a lot of comments on this all the time, wherever I go. People say, whoa, I like that. Yeah. Having a cap that says resilience is kind of cool. Yeah. And it sparks conversation, and you get to meet people and learn about them. And
yeah, definitely. And I feel like these last couple of years for all of us have been a time when we need resilience. There've been lots of times, globally or nationally in America where we feel like we kind of recover from one thing and then something else sweeps us off our feet. And so I think there's just a collective sense of how do we navigate these? How do we get through these difficult time. So
I,
I really, go ahead.
I completely agree with you. Our American system was originally thought of as an experiment, and it's an ongoing experiment that has changed. But what our founding fathers set up was so cool,
Yeah.
and we can't just toss it aside. We have to examine it and understand it and follow it as much as we possibly can. Because this, as much as I've traveled in the world to not just Nepal and India and Jordan and Egypt and Belize and Australia, and I actually went to Antarctica last winter. So I have seen the best and the worst around the globe, and the best is still here.
Yeah, we're very unique throughout history and even, today. And I think a lot of people who've been born and raised in America don't realize how unique that is. And we homeschool. So studying history with my kids and studying everything that came before, I'm just like, this was like crazy different at the time to run a nation this way, to say that the people had a say in what happened. So
it was totally so radical.
Yeah.
And to use the phrase American exceptionalism is not accepted anymore. And it's terrible that we're losing it, because we are still exceptional. We are so different than many other places on the globe. And we have to honor that, without a doubt. That's why on a lot of my slides, I don't know if you noticed it or not, especially the ones that were on the resilience slides themselves, I've got in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got the flag.
Yeah.
And I have to honor that every day in my life, that I was a soldier in Vietnam. I fought for my country. I have to stand up for those same things now, even though we've got a different philosophy kind of blooming that we don't, many of us don't want.
Yeah. Well, thank you also for your service. We appreciate that as well.
Thank you. Well, this has really been a pleasure. I really enjoyed being here with you. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
Oh, no, this has been great. I've learned a lot. I love hearing your stories. If our listeners want to connect with you more and find out more, or connect with you to see what kinds of things you have to offer or get your book, can you tell us where they can find you?
Definitely. My book is called Tenacity, as you said when you introduced me. You don't have to get lost in Nepal to find yourself, but it helps. It's on Amazon. I published it through their publishing system, so it's on Amazon. My name's in the upper left-hand corner of the screen right now, and my website is just my name, KeithRennison.com. But there's 4 N's in Rennison. It's RENNINSON. I always tease people and say I sound like I'm a 2-cycle motor engine. It's Rennison. I'm also on YouTube, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm in Facebook.
All right.
I'm pretty easy to find.
All right. And those links will be in the show notes for those of you who are listening, or in the notes below the video on YouTube. And feel free, please, to connect with Keith and to learn more about what he has to share, because he has a lot of other great ideas that we just don't have time to get to today. But thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You're welcome. Thank you.